So tonight I thought I would start what I was doing today. I missed sitting here. And I'll just read it to you since I thought, well, a lot of times I'll have to bring my own poem to start and stuff. So I have this Caring Bridge. It's kind of a website that's been really helpful this last year in my illness. So I had to update it. I'll just read to you since it's what I did today. 11 months have gone by since my surgery. Yesterday, the reminder came. My doctor asked me to complete the required survey forms. Bummer. I would like not to think about any of this, but alas, precious body must be taken care of. Soon I will need to take my required ultra-sensitive PSA test, letting you know which way the wind blows. I had a dream last night. Some Himalayan peak peeked out at me from nowhere, some longing for its presence. My heart skipped a beat. I knew somewhere deep down inside, long before my biopsy, before the cancer was removed, which at the time of the surgery had reached 90%, was jerking my life out of a complacency, tearing shreds of sanity apart, the wolves of time nipping at my heels. Anything that didn't fit, unfortunately, had to go, including a precious body part and a piece of my heart. 1 year and 2 surgical procedures later, I embarked on a journey, pilgrimage, to those beloved mountains of my youth. India, mother of chaos, and the subtle self-organizing of the heart. I have felt the enormity of your kindness, generosity, which will help carry me through almost 6 months of grazing in the Asian fields of Dharma practice and study. Yes, returning to share these ragged insights that propel me on. Winter Solstice Retreat, December 19, 2010, with Heather Donald and myself. The light inside the dark. My first foray into the bones of teaching. So that's what I wrote today. I didn't know I'd hit it, but since it was right there with me, I thought, what the heck? Got to start somewhere. And then the other thing was, let me find it. So, really starting to talk, this is from David White, and it's called Fire in the Song. The mouth opens and fills the air with its vibrant shape, until the air and the mouth become one shape. And the first word, your own word, spoken from that fire, surprises, burns, grieves you now because you made that pact with the dark presence in your life. He said, if you only stop singing, I'll make you safe. He said, if only you stop singing, I'll make you safe. And he repeated the line, knowing you would hear, I'll make you safe. as the comforting sound of a door closed on the fear at last. But as darkness crept under your tongue and became the dim cave where you sheltered, and you grew in that small place, too frightened to remember the songs of the world. Its impossible notes and the sweet joy that flew out the door of your wild mouth as you spoke. So, the fear that shut the door. So tonight, I'd like to talk about the pilgrimage that some years ago I did to a place called Borobudur. And Borobudur is one of the greatest monuments, it's the largest and greatest monument of Buddhism that exists today. And it happens to be in no other than in Indonesia, on the island of Java. And I have a daughter who's been living 4 years in Bali, so I went and I took her and her, at the time she was pregnant, and her partner up to Borobudur. And you fly up to Java, and then you go into the middle of the island with these volcanoes around it, and all the rice fields there. And it's made out of lava stone. And it was lost until I'm not sure if it was the 20s or 30s, that there was, through the communities, there was a rumor that this thing existed. But in the 11th century, of course, or 13th century, I'm not sure which, the Muslims came through, and then it became a Muslim nation, and that was totally lost and became just jungle. Because I'm sure it happened quite rapidly, as it happens there in the jungle. And it's interesting, the pilgrimage, it was from the 8th to the 11th century. It was probably the most popular of Buddhist pilgrimages from India. Actually, you can go also almost to Persia, Afghanistan, to China. And people would go on ships, and they would go. It would take them ages to get to the island of Java. And then they would have to take ox carts or whatever into the center. And there was this magnificent, you could say monument or stupa or temple that's there. It's actually in 3 parts. And so you have about 3 or 4 kilometers between the first temple, and then there's the second temple, and then the main edifice there, temple. And it's interesting, the process, because the pilgrimage people started so far away and came there. But then once you get there, there is a very identifiable journey that in those years you made by foot. Now you can do by rickshaw. But the first one really has to do, it's funny because the little kids would come and they had like a big mirror, and inside this first temple, which was by this huge pipal tree, a Bodhi tree, enormous thing. I mean, it's, take up this whole room, much bigger than this room, the tops of it, And then there was this temple that was, I don't know, maybe 40, 50 feet high, and there was a series of steps that you climbed, and there was significance in every little piece that was done. And part of the significance was this whole process that this was the archetypal journey of going on this, what we're in process here with. And what's interesting about the first thing, the kids have this little mirror, and you go up these stairs, and there is probably a Buddha 3/4 the size up to the top of those windows that's inside of it. and it's all dark inside, this black lava stone. And there is a Buddha that's seated on a chair. And it is Maitreya Buddha, the coming Buddha. And it really begins saying that, this journey there, and Maitreya Buddha is the Buddha of metta, of loving kindness, who comes after Gautama Buddha, this last Buddha of 2,500 years ago in the kind of history. But to me, it really says that that this is this is not something of the past. That the pilgrimage that we're on is something that has. It's like in the morning when we make an intention or our motivation for practice. And in this case, this coming Buddha. And I hope that you all can be there when he appears. Or she appears. So you begin this journey, and so you go up and you go around, and there are all these kind of angels and devas and stuff that are carved into the circumambulation around this big Buddha inside. And devas are the kind of the angels and the tree spirits and the things that we have to suspend our belief system to actually know that, in our Western practice, which has become so based on psychology and rationalism and science. Those are really the three things that we've tried to bring, because it's the thing the Western mind is interested in. But at the same time, there is the suspending of belief systems. And I've never met a deva, but I do believe they exist, and tree spirits and all sorts of things that one of my teachers, Anagarika Manindra, used to say, and this is in the 60s in India, and he would go in and sit, and there would maybe be 8 people in the room, and he'd be sitting teaching, and he would always say, well, there's 8 of you, but there's hundreds of other beings that are here to hear the Dharma, So maybe there are hundreds of other beings here to hear the Dharma. I mean, that's the kind of expansion that's possible, in the sense, maybe there's more. And it's not getting lost in some magical thinking or something. It's just the fact that we can suspend the kind of the rationalism and say, maybe the universe is bigger than I could imagine, looking out in the Hubble telescope, and seeing in darkness, way out there in the middle of nowhere, there's universes, and universes, and universes. So we sit and we understand that we have to have this intention and motivation for freedom, and that it is a process, a journey. So at that point, then you have to cross 2 rivers, and you get to the second temple, and that's really the one I want to kind of expound on tonight. It's a little temple, a small temple. And this small temple is actually known as the Temple of Toxins. Okay? And the practice, if you didn't have this piece, that the fact that we are this conditioning of, first of all, of confusion, and of let's say questionable words and actions that are part of the force that is part of our life. I guess otherwise it would be Buddhist. But that's what's there. And so we come here in many ways, we sit, and there is a piece of making friends with this temple of toxins. And so you've been sitting here, and I hope you don't have this, but it's also part of the process. And the process sometimes is simply noted as a purification. That to sit and be quiet is to listen to those things maybe we didn't want to listen to, or we didn't want to hear. And that they have to come and inform us about this possibility of transformation. Without them, there is no going to the third temple. That's not possible. So, what is it that holds us? And I think one of the most fundamental base emotions of human beings is that, as David White kind of put it, is this thing around fear and safety. That we're always looking for something that's safe. And yet, the question that he brings out is that there is a part of us that is squished or shrunk or made small by the fear itself. And so there's a piece of coming to this practice and making friends with the fear itself. This word toxin. This is from Pema Chodron. What we call obstacles are really the way the world and our entire experience teach us where we're stuck. What we call obstacles are really the way the world and our entire experience teach us where we're stuck. So if you find yourself kind of caught up, I'm sure you're not, but caught up in a story or something that happened in the past or something very early or so-and-so said this or whatever it is, but it comes back and it may come and repeat itself. You may not have it, but things come, and they began to. And sometimes it's something. Oh, you worked on in therapy for years, and what the hell is it coming back after all this time? I've already worked it out, right? But it's not so much about whether you worked it out or not. It's pointing at something primal and necessary to purify, to kind of take the toxicity out of it, And so, from this practice's point of view, it doesn't have to be the most compelling story. It simply has to be something that's repeating, and you are willing to first of all try to feel what's moving it, what's underneath it, what's pushing on it. And that's really why we call this insight. Is that you have to start to get what the feeling is that's happening with it. It's tricky. They talk about it as sometimes kind of demons or hindrances that come and grab us and in trances for a period of time. And the easiest one I see that comes up is aversion, which sometimes has to do with the inner critic or the judge, and that we, someone moves this way, we judge them, however. Somebody else moves that way, and we judge them how, and we go around and say, oh, we're so discerning. But actually, if you really kind of feel where it comes from, there's this tremendous amount of judgmentalness that goes with the, it has intelligence. But it also is pointing at something. And that something usually, in this case, is something about dislike. Somehow it registers as unpleasantness. And so we then do what? We can talk, right? We make up, nobody's talking here, so you make up a story about them, That's good enough, right? We call them, that's right, VVs, Vipassana Vendettas. Somebody closed the door, and I'm sure they did it on purpose. I was right there. So we have all this subtle manure for our inner working that gives us some kind of clue, here in this arena, in this kind of, there's a thing in this kind of, it's like theater in some way, but on a very subtle level, because the things that are manifesting in our thinking, in our concocting, have basis in our kind of personality piece. So watch it. It's very interesting. That I'm sure there's not much of it here, but and it sneaks up on you, and so these are clues, that you are being informed about your internal languaging and your reaction, and you might have just made it up, but there's a definite feeling that goes with it. And really what I'm trying to talk about is the feelings that are there. What is it that's leading it? And it has to do with the simplicity of, how we work with aversive states and thoughts. And I still think they're actually easier than its opposite, the other side of the coin, which is the experience of pleasantness. And pleasantness is, it's, first of all, it's so supported culturally. It's the thing that's supposed to make us happy. So, of course, pleasant sensation wherever we see it, notice it, taste it, watch the taste, and things that happen. That it's not in kind of the practice here, it's not that pleasantness is a bad thing. Okay? It's that, and my example is always pretty much the same. There's 10 moments, you're allowed 10 moments of pleasantness. And it seems like in the first 3 moments, they work really well. And then something very subtle happens. Maybe not so subtle, but it's subtle because we have to learn about it. And there's a difference between pleasantness and wanting. And what can slip in the middle of those 10 moments of pleasantness is suddenly, instead of just being with it, we see ourselves leaning out and grabbing a hold of it. And it suddenly, there's this wanting. Now, the verse is, it feels kind of lousy, and we get it's actually easier to work with in some ways, we get the toxin right away. But the toxin of wanting is much subtler. And so, the difference between just being in the center of experience and saying, okay, I got 10 moments of presence, that's, my karma, whatever, has allowed that. And suddenly 3 moments into it, that chocolate, I gotta have a pound of it, And there's this leaning, and that leaning suddenly, there's actually a different feeling, And the teaching here is based on, first of all, that we have to kind of wrestle with the mind in some ways, and let it settle down, and try to find this place in the center where we sit. And that what we sit in center of is actually just a place of, it's peaceful, and pleasantness comes, unpleasantness comes, and we just sit there. That's really what we're doing here. But the reactivity, and seeing that suddenly, that pleasantness has a habit pattern that says, one thing it says very clearly is that what's here, even in that pleasantness, is not enough. So it's simply saying, here and now is not enough. And so we lean out, and somehow then we begin to concoct and notice that what was pleasant, when we actually feel it, the wanting, what's that feel like? What's different than just experiencing it, or what is wanting like? And you'll keep trying to learn this piece. This is not one, but it is a fundamental learning that has to happen here. Because the wanting in any, if you stay with it for long enough, it goes from just wanting to a thing called suffering. In the same way, the aversiveness, I think, happens quicker. In a sense, we notice the suffering quicker with the aversion, but not with the pleasant. So these are just juxtapositions of trying to learn how the kind of toxins, these reactive states arise. Fear is interesting, because again, I think that under all of this, why is it that we can't let go of our sense experience? What is it in the dualism that keeps us so attached, believing somehow that, this time, it's going to do it for us, even though it hasn't proved out. But this time, it's going to do. So, we have things like more primal kind of reactions to aversion, as, say, anger. In anger, there's several sides to the anger. One of anger, just to protect or defend the organism. Pretty primal, in the same way that fear, like when the child is running across the road, you run and grab the child, get out of the way of the car. Primal, instinctual, kind of the reptilian brain part of it. But That's not what we deal with most of the time. What we actually deal with is that, again, the concocti that we're making up stuff about our experience, which is based on what? It's always about the self on some level, that we keep aggrandizing. On one side it's aggrandizing, and the other one, I'm the schmuck, I'm this, and it's just a coin, it's going back and forth in this play. But let's go back to anger, because anger is really fascinating to me. It's this, there's the defensive part of it, just like the fear, which is part of our reptilian reaction, which is only what percent of our life? Not very much. Down in the maybe 3 percentile, I don't know. And the rest is all made up. And it's interesting how anger, when it ignites, it actually, what happens to a person is they actually it's very focusing, by the way, but they narrow their attention down to themselves. So what happens is that by narrowing oneself down to such a degree, such a kind of, really is very small, that one has, and you can't, no matter what states arise, you can't stay in them. They're always something that transcends states. So the anger arises, you're there for a little while, and then there is a moment of emptiness now, but the emptiness is not Buddhist emptiness. It's actually the recognition of non-connectedness. Okay? And that moment of non-connectedness sometimes just takes and accelerates it back into the anger again. So it keeps running around in its own circle. It also then drops down sometimes into the fear. Where it suddenly realizes that here is, this concentrated self that suddenly no longer is aware of the world it lives in. So it's actually isolated itself completely from its wholeness. And in recognizing that, there is this tremendous fear that then comes into one. And that fear, again, can recirculate back into the anger. And so there's this selfing process that's going on there. Now, what's also possible is to realize one is disconnected. I don't know if this is making sense to you, but I'm trying. Is that at that moment, then one realizes one is disconnected and that fear is there, is then, and knowing that you have been out of it, and caught in this little smallness called anger and fear, and the recycling of it, that there is a tremendous amount of sadness. Because suddenly there's awareness that you're no longer whole. You've been split off and you suddenly realize you've been disconnected. And so there's this tremendous sadness that can happen, or must happen somewhere in that returning to wholeness. And I love tears. I think it's something I didn't learn for a long time. When I was a little kid in boarding school in Switzerland, and I guess I was a sensitive kid, and And I was the youngest kid in the boarding school, and I was always getting in trouble and stuff. But there was the whole thing about being a boy, and even though I was the youngest, about not crying in front of everybody. So I would go downstairs where we kept our skis and ski boots and all that stuff, and there was a desk down there. I'd go cry under the desk, And then as I grew older, I realized, this is not cool. I'm a guy. So it took a long time to actually understand that, I had no means sometimes of recycling that anger all the way through the emptiness and the fear and down into the sadness. And then the biochemical process of letting go, which is simply tears. And it took me a long time, actually, to realize the capacity that I had to reconnect through the kind of my own toxicity. And I think it's something we all have to learn on some level. That somehow we have to realize the disconnect and sometimes the anger, the fear, or the possessiveness, our obsessiveness of what we want and how it's not really what's here, or of what we're afraid of, or what we don't like, and how we react to all of that. That's all the suffering that has to be somehow recycled here. And that recycling then begins this process of purification. I used to think, that sometimes it seemed so long that you had stories that you held, and sometimes you held them for months or years, and that early damage or whatever that we carried around with us, or divorces, or so and so did this, or took me for that, or something, and that we all carry pieces of this story of our wounds, our hurts. And our practice here, even though sometimes I think it takes a long time, this method, and I'm sure there's some maybe therapy methods or whatever that may be quicker, but it still works. It's a slow process of seeing seeing your operating system and seeing how you've created your own conditions that cause you the pain and the suffering that you really can see clearly here sometimes, not always, but sometimes. And that they are it's just manure. It's being, recycled and turned. And what's true about the kind of temple of toxins, that it's the humanistic part. To screw up is actually a way, when it's seen, to find that sensitivity of heart, which can help you move on, into this path of awakening. So all of that history, I talked about it as the splinters, and they are imperative in some way to be understood, to not to obsess on them, but to use the practice of the difference between leaning into them or pushing away from them and finding this place in the center with just a breath breathing itself. It's not I, it's not me, it's not mine, it's just being breathed. And that when we're sitting in the center of being breathed, all those little hooks, I think of them sometimes turning to silly putty. They go from kind of titanium to silly putties. But it takes time, for that. The Buddha made an analogy about insight that I love, and it has to do with kusha grass. And he talked about our capacity to, there was kusha grass, and you can't see down to the bottom of the pond. And he says you can take, and a lot of this practice is, first of all, is kind of using our, I used the words last night of kind of our energy, our effort, our concentration to kind of push it aside. But he talked about the mindfulness, the insight itself, as like going down to the bottom and slowly moving the mud aside. It's like fanning the mud aside till the grass lets go. And so, because if you just put your hands in there and push it aside, which a lot of the practice does, then you put your hands back together, you pull your hands out, and the weeds come back, or the kusha grass comes out, and you can't see. But this practice is going down there and slowly uprooting. Uprooting that grass, so eventually when it comes out, one has a clear sight to the bottom. So it takes time, and it takes that fanning, which I think all the stories and all the knee pains and the heartaches, all that stuff, that as we approach it with this, in a sense, just the simpleness of this mindful of what it is, you're not doing anything, but it moves. It moves. It knows the difference of here and about, and the power of here. Untangles the tangles. Two pieces I'll read here. This is François Fillon, monk, 1651-1715. As the light increases, we see ourselves to be worse than we thought. We are amazed at our former blindness as we see issuing forth. Now you remember this is a monk in the 17th century. Issuing forth from the depths of our heart a whole swarm of shameful feelings, like filthy reptiles crawling from a hidden cave. We never could have believed that we had harbored such things, and we stand aghast as we watch them gradually appear. But while our faults diminish, the light by which we see them waxes brighter, and we are filled with horror. Bear in mind, for your comfort, that we only perceive our malady when the cure begins. We only perceive our malady when the cure begins. One more piece I'd like to read tonight. It goes with that temple of toxins. From Letters to a Young Poet, letter 8 from Rilke. We have no reason to harbor any mistrust against our world, for it is not against us. If it has terrors, they are our terrors. If it has abysses, these abysses belong to us. If there are dangers, we must try to love them. And if only we arrange our life in accordance with the principles which tells us that we must always trust in the difficult. If only we arrange our life in accordance with the principle which tells us that we must always trust in the difficult. Then what now appears to us the most alien will become our most intimate and trusted experience. How could we forget those ancient myths that stand at the beginning of all races? The myths about dragons that at the last moment are transformed into princesses. Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting for us to act just once with beauty and courage. Perhaps everything that frightens us is in its deepest essence something helpless that wants our love. Perhaps everything that frightens us is in its deepest essence something helpless that wants our love. So you mustn't be frightened, dear Mr. Tapas, if a sadness rises in front of you larger than any you have ever seen. If any anxiety, like light and cloud, shadows, move across your hands and over everything you do, you must realize that something is happening to you. That life has not forgotten you. That it holds you in its hands and will not let you fall. Why do you want to shut out of your life any uneasiness, any misery, any depression, since after all, you don't know what works these conditions are doing inside of you? Why do you want to shut out of your life any uneasiness, any misery, any depression, since after all, you don't know what work these conditions are doing inside of you? So you have this process, the temple of toxins, and we must go through. We must go through it, And you have to see how the difference between desire and wanting, and the simple unpleasantness and aversion. Simple things, but quite different in the difference between the way we react to things and our capacity to respond. They're two different things. And this practice is asking that, on some level, that if you can allow sometimes those difficulties to move you, to to allow them, so much of them have to do with opening the heart. Our fears and how we clutch at what we think is right and how it's supposed to be and the way it should have been. Or all the concoct that we create that cause this movement. And if we let it do that, then it's not far to the Borobudur itself. And the Borobudur itself is a spiral that takes you up. And there's Buddhas, and there's the story of the Jataka of the Buddha in his past lives, all carved into into this temple monument, and literally tens of thousands of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and different stories and lives of the Buddha. And in all the corners as you go up, there are these bell shapes, and these bell shapes are these. Most of them have the Buddha still in them. So there's these bell shapes carved out of stone, with inside of it is carved a Buddha, that's maybe 6 times life size. And you go up, and finally, it took us 3 days. We'd do a little bit, and then it was hot, and then rain a little, and then we'd go out and ride an elephant, come back, and then, do a little piece. And I said, no, we can't do it all, like people can go straight up. We had to just do it little by little. And finally, when you get to the top, you can see these rice fields below you, and the palm trees, and one large volcano with kind of pelt of smoke coming out of it. I mean, absolutely gorgeous. And you get up the top, and there's the bells, shapes, but there's nothing in them. They're empty. And they were done that way. It's the journey. So who ends up there? Why are they empty? I'm not going to answer that. You have to think about, why are they empty? If you go through this journey, then who's left? So, that's Borobudur. Let's just sit for a moment.
Yes, sir.
So, I didn't understand what the kids were doing in the mirrors.
Oh, they shine the mirror and so you can see in the dark the Buddha. So it's for paisa, a few rupees, they got the tourists, they want to see the Buddha, okay, give them some water.
Is there enough light throughout the to see, or? Yeah.
You see inside, it's just, you know, it's the little kids of Asia, you know, finding a way to make a couple rupees. They're finding there's every different way possible.
What are carvings like inside the third temple?
They're not inside, they're actually, they go up in the World Heritage, United Nations, they're World Heritage Sites, and this became World Heritage Site some years ago, so they restored a lot of things. Oh, one interesting thing about it, I heard but I don't know, is that there are all these, you know, it goes up through all these heaven realms and stuff, is down below, underneath it, are carved the hell realms. The hell realms. You know, that actually they carved in stone.
How could you miss it?
You're saying hell is not open to the public?
And I heard it from someone else. Heard it from the Balinese, Javan guy that takes you around and stuff.
For a price.
Especially the hell rock. You don't come for free. So,
Pilgrimage to Java.
excuse me,
A pilgrimage to Java.
was done a lot in the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th centuries. I think up to 11th century.
But it's open now.
It's open now.
World Heritage
Yeah.
Site.
It's been open for probably, I think, probably 30 years.
How do you get there from Bali?
You take a plane up to Java, and then you have to get a taxi, maybe an hour and 20 minutes or something like that, into the center of the island. I've forgotten the name of the town you take a plane from, but that's in Bali. But that's the usual. And usually it was interesting that people come for one day. That, you know, they fly up because it's a World Heritage Site. They just fly in and they go and they climb up and they go back down again. And they have lunch in this nice restaurant and then they go.
And they get a t-shirt.
And you get a t-shirt. I got one.
Is there a place to stay there then? Or do you
Yes,
have to come-
yes, you could know you know, if you really want to go, it's really incredible because they have a hotel there. It's actually connected inside the grounds, so you're not assaulted by the whole world out there. It's quite nice, you know. And then you take forays out from there. They have gates and guards. No, and they actually, you know, the World Heritage has done a great job. It's sort of like Angkor Wat, in the sense they also have done that there.
It's all relatively intact.
And they just took over Bodh Gaya, which is, to me, there is some creepiness around that, I think, in some ways. You know, because they're taking the beggars and a lot of little store owners that I know and stuff, and they're pushing them out. Because it's really a working temple, so it's a little. And so is Borobudur, except for when I was there was Thai monks and Tibetan monks and stuff that were there. They were staying. They were not the ones going up and down. They're actually kind of staying for a while. But who would have known? Who would have thunk? There was a great. His name was Lama Chekawa. And Lama Chekawa was one of the greatest Tibetan teachings is a 7-point mind trial. And it comes from Lama Chekawa. And Lama Chekawa was from Indonesia. You know, because at one time, that whole world And you think of India, where Buddhism was lost from the 5th century BC to the 13th century before the Muslims came in, that was pretty much a Buddhist country. And you had beautiful, there's a lot I would like to read more. There's not a whole lot about it, between the Greeks and the Indians. And there is a text where King Milinda, who was a Greek, asked questions of this monk, the Sri Lankan monk. And it's a whole discourse, maybe in the, right around, just a little before Christ or whenever. And there was this whole exchange between the Greeks, the time of, when you have, Aristotle and Plato and all this, that there was this exchange, but neither one of them spoke about it. I was talking to recently, just last month, to Steve Batchelor, who just finished a book on that. What's it, the Buddhist atheist? Good, he's great. Great kind of intellectual. But this whole exchange that happened that we don't have much knowledge of some of our early beginnings. And the same way for Indians, they didn't acknowledge the Greeks, who were also, great thinkers and stuff. So, interesting, historically, where East and West actually have been meeting for some time, but, and culture fusion. But supposedly there wasn't much acknowledgement there. So, interesting. Do you want to walk? I just want to sit there.